Welcome to MilSpouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. Need some inspiration as you navigate military life, moves, deployments, raising military kids, keeping your marriage together, career issues, and more? Get an encouraging, humorous outlook from a spouse who's been there for 30 years. Join host Jen McDonald, author of You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, who knows that we're stronger together. Jen also writes regularly for outlets such as Military Spouse Magazine and has been featured in numerous books and national publications. Grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and sit back and relax as Jen talks with military spouses both new and experienced who will give you realistic hope and support for your own MilSpouse journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of the MilSpouse Matters podcast. I'm Jen, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. So here we find ourselves in week, I don't even know, of the quarantine and social distancing due to coronavirus. I hope you're doing okay. It's a different time, isn't it? I gave some tips last week just about kind of in general about homeschooling and being at home and maybe working from home. And so I really decided that I wanted to do a whole episode for those of you that suddenly find yourselves in charge of your kids' education because of school closing. And a lot of them are closed for the rest of the school year. And so this is now on you. And so we're going to be talking about some tips to help you get through this time, whether you're working from home too, or you're out of a job, but whatever your situation is that you find yourself in, that you are now in charge of schooling your kids or at least supervising. Just a reminder, you can access the complete show archive at milspousematters.com. Just click the podcast tab and you can listen to all the past episodes, find show notes and resources, along with easy buttons to subscribe in whatever podcast player you're using. And of course, it's always free to listen to the podcast, and I would love it if you would subscribe and leave a 5-star review or share an episode or the show with somebody else that you think could use it. I would appreciate that so much. So on today's show, I'm talking to Claire Wood about temporary homeschooling during the coronavirus pandemic. You might remember Claire from episode 20, where we talked about finding community as a military spouse. Claire is a proud military spouse, homeschooling mom, writer, and podcaster. She calls home anywhere the Army sends her. Claire loves reading, writing, getting outdoors, and hosting friends in her home. Her book, Mission Ready Marriage, is available on Amazon. She also co-hosts a weekly podcast with her Milspo Gurus partner, Kelly, which is called Advice Not Given, that can be found on your favorite podcast player. She shares her personal life at elizabethclairewood.com, and she's offering a free resource here for those considering homeschooling. So let's jump right into today's discussion with Claire. Thanks for listening. So welcome to Claire. I was looking back for your episode that we recorded together, and I realized it has been a year already. It's hard to believe. So I'm really glad to have you back on the show, Claire.
Thank you for having me. And I can tell you that last year when we recorded, I was not, we're going to be talking about homeschooling today. I wasn't homeschooling then. We had transitioned away for a year. And when we recorded last year, I was actually teaching 4th grade at a private school. But I'm back home again, so lots has changed.
So are you homeschooling because of the coronavirus, or you already had decided to do that on your own?
We had already decided to do it on our own. It was partly motivated by the fact that we were intending to PCS back in December, and just for some back to continuity and freedom with our schedules and flexibility, we had just decided to go back to it. But now, honestly, I really am super grateful that we did, because I've been in this mindset all school year. I haven't had to just jump right into it here in March and April.
Oh my goodness. And we'll get to that in just a minute, because Claire is going to give us some really good tips about homeschooling and expectations. But fill us in, other than you're back to homeschooling and you were teaching, what else has happened since the last time we talked. I think there's
Well,
been a lot.
There has been a lot. So we did think we were moving in December of 2019, and the Army kind of pushed that off, and we were supposed to PCS this summer. We still are supposed to
goodness.
PCS this summer. As of right now, we're just kind of waiting to hear what the new policy will be and how that's going to impact it. But yeah, Kelly and I of Millspo Gurus, we have introduced and launched a podcast out into the world called Advice Not Given, and we share weekly conversations just about all kinds of things, and we've had a lot of fun doing that. So that's been a big bright spot for our work with Millspo Gurus, is getting that podcast out into the world.
And I love it. I think you guys I was just telling her before we started recording, they're doing a very good job of being consistent.
Thank you.
And it's really fun and good tips. And yeah, you guys are just super natural at it. And it's very, positive and casual, and it's a good listen. So we will link to that for sure. But it's called, what's the name of the podcast? Is Advice Not Taken or Not Given?
Advice Not Given. The premise is just we've found ourselves falling into these patterns of kind of calling each other. And because Kelly and I have not really been in-person friends, we just felt this freedom to kind of say, like, hey, here's what you need to do. Like, you need to try this, or you need to take this advice. And we thought, maybe these conversations we are having about a lot of big universal issues and struggles. And we thought, let's start recording those and putting those out. And obviously, organizing them and editing them and polishing them a little bit. But we've had a lot of good feedback from our community with that.
They're awesome. I love it.
Thank you.
I just think the world of both you and Kelly. So go give that a listen for sure. I did ask Claire to come on today because, I don't want to make all my content about what's going on in the world. I usually try to kind of do things that are more evergreen or things that you can, always utilize. But I do feel like I wanted to just go ahead and give some tips about homeschooling, because there's so many people. And I was looking at a map today of how many states have closed schools, but there are so many people suddenly thrust into home educating, so many schools that are closed at least into April, the majority of states and Dodea, and many are into May, or they're closed for the rest of the school year. Assessments and testing are canceled. People are suddenly using Zoom or other online resources to home educate. It's just very unprecedented, with families kind of thrown into this homeschooling. And I use the term loosely because I feel like homeschooling is something you would choose to do.
Right.
So a lot of families have kind of been forced into, I don't want to say forced like it's bad, but they've been required to now educate their children or take charge of their education. And so I was looking on Facebook. I've seen a lot of posts from people, giving out, quote, homeschooling advice. And some of it just doesn't ring true for what this is. Right. So I thought, you as a teacher, you as a homeschooler, we can talk about what this actually is, especially families that are also having to work from home and homeschool, or they're an essential worker and they are also having to work more or be out more. And then they have to make sure their sixth graders getting their schooling. So it's just such a crazy time.
Yeah. Well, I would first address what you mentioned as what we're calling this right now. And I had a good friend early on several weeks ago that posted a really profound post about kind of some encouragement to people finding themselves in this position. And something that she said really stuck out to me. And she said that this is not homeschooling in the best sense that you're getting to do all the fun parts of it, right? Those of us who've chosen this as a lifestyle, or even as, for a whole year, we have had the benefit of preparation. We have the advantage of getting to choose our curriculum. We get to choose the delivery method. We get to have, prior to social distancing, we could join co-ops and clubs and lessons and have outside time.
You can leave the house.
Yeah, we could leave the house. And so to say that what people are doing right now is, air quotes, homeschooling isn't really fair to people who really do homeschool, but it's definitely not a fair depiction of what people finding themselves in this situation are doing. So I have been calling it temporary schooling from home. I know that's just a minor shift of word choice, but I think putting the word temporary at the beginning of it is maybe a sense of peace and calming to know that this won't last forever. And when you're doing something temporarily, you know that you can do it. It's there will be an end to it. So I've been referring to it, yes, as temporary schooling from home.
I love that. And I don't know what you're seeing in your community. I think one big benefit of it is, I work from home and I've worked from home for a decade. So I
Right.
usually go walk and run during the middle of the day. And suddenly I'm seeing families sitting at the park or families on walks or bike rides because they're trying to get their kids out. So I think
Yeah.
that side of it's kind of really cool to suddenly see families spending all that time together.
Right.
But it's a challenge, especially if it's something you've never done. So one thing I wanted to mention is that Claire does have a couple of free downloads. One is called So You Think You Want to Homeschool, and the other is 10 Tips for Peaceful Temporary Homeschooling. And we'll share more about those at the end. And we'll also link to those in the show notes for you to grab. But I wanted you to kind of talk about, from your perspective as both a teacher and a homeschooler, what would be maybe your top few tips for new temporary homeschoolers? I love that term.
Right. So the first thing I think you have to consider, even if your school is sending home very detailed lessons or requiring Zoom calls, one of the first things I think is helpful for the parent is to realize that you have been used to your children being under the care of a team of educators, teachers, PE coaches, librarians, cafeteria administrators. It's now on you. And so you very much need to get in the mindset that it's not going to be the same. It's definitely not going to be the same amount of time your kids have spent at school. And so I think most people know that just by, pure common sense, that it's not going to take your kids 8 hours to complete their schoolwork. The next part of that is, okay, then what do we do to fill this time?
Right.
And one of my biggest tips would be to say that you need to lower the expectations for yourself, lower expectations for your kids, and realize that it's okay for them to find themselves bored. It's okay for them to figure out what they're going to do within reason. But you got to just let that go, that it's going to now all fall to you and it's all on your shoulders. Yes, in many ways it is, but you can't recreate what they were doing in a traditional school building at home.
I think that's such a good reminder, and I hope that will relieve some pressure off of people. And I do think some people do think that they need to fill up the time from 8 to 3 and just like they were in a classroom. So maybe elaborate on that a little bit, because I think that a lot of people don't realize how efficient it can be to school at home.
Absolutely. So we've kind of, even though we've been homeschooling, I've readjusted our schedule just a little bit. And I like to use the term rhythm over schedule. I prefer that we have a set rhythm where we just kind of start with one thing, then the next thing, then the next, then the next, instead of saying you will be up by 7:30 and we will be at the table by 8 a.m. That's setting everybody up for failure and frustration and disappointment. So we say, we're going to start with, morning time at the table. We're going to have about an hour where I'd like for you to focus and get your academic work finished. Then I would like for you to take some outside time. Then we will have lunch, and there's no set times for that.
Yeah.
We kind of loosely have times, but there's no frustration when we've gone past the first start time from sleeping in or getting a phone call or a FaceTime call from grandparents. It's just another way to set expectations.
Yeah.
Another thing that I have really suggested, I feel like a lot of parents who maybe have been in traditional school for their kids' whole academic careers, you just have turned that part of your kids' lives over to your kids' teachers naturally. Now that you're home with them, it is important that you set the temperature and the mood and the boundary that yes, or no, you're not the teacher, but you are implementing. You're the facilitator now.
Yeah.
And I think it goes a long way at the front end to kind of help set that boundary that you will be the point person for this. You will be the facilitator, the acting teacher. Give yourself a creative name. I've always called myself the headmaster of our school. But just kind of set that boundary for your kids so that there's not so much maybe relational or emotional discord or fighting of well, you're not my teacher. Why don't I want to be your teacher? Just kind of set the stage for success by going ahead up front and making that clear to your kids that no, I'm not your teacher, but I am the one in charge. And I don't know. I just think that goes a long way to smooth things for everybody.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And kind of going back to your point about more of a rhythm of the day, that is definitely the kind of homeschooler I was. We did homeschool for 20 whatever years.
Yeah.
And, like, again, if your kid has to sign in for classes at specific times, we're not talking about that. You have to do that, right? You're required to do that. But during the time I was homeschooling, there was a big movement of this scheduling thing, like every 30 minutes. And it was so unnatural at home. It's just so unnatural. Right. So we'd get up, have our breakfast time, our outside time, or this. And even when my kids are older, I had to have time in the afternoon.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people say, well, my kids won't nap. Well, they can go read a book and be quiet. Every day after lunch, that was always we would read a book aloud, and everybody just knew you go off to your room, or the baby would go in the crib, for a nap or playpen with toys. And that was just something I had to have, that little break or pause in the middle of the day. I had 4 kids the oldest was 7 when I had the last one. And so I had a lot of activity in our house, and I just had to do that. So if you're, you don't feel like you have to be on all day,
right?
Because you maybe feel guilty because your kids are missing their friends and their teachers and all the activities they're used to. You have to make this doable for, it looks like, months.
The long haul.
You have to be able to.
That's actually one of the tips I give in the little thing I've shared with you, the link on 10 tips for peaceful homeschooling. I try to aim every day for a quiet hour. And like you said, my kids are 16, 14, and 12. They're not going to go take a nap. But they can go entertain themselves off of screens. We all need a time to restore. And we have found, usually, like you said, after lunch, maybe from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, we try to just have all sounds turned down, like no phone calls, no screens. And I kind of threaten them in a way of like, well, either you go be quiet or I will find something for you to do. And
chores.
Yeah, it's sort of like a boxing bout where I'm like, okay, everybody to your corners. We all need to wipe the sweat, wipe the blood, wipe the tears, and then we're ready for the next part of the day.
Everybody needs a break. It's not just for the parents. All the kids need to have that quiet moment. And you can read a book for a few minutes and not bother me. And sometimes they'd fall asleep. Yeah. Because, they'd be so exhausted from whatever. But
well, and I think even for your quest or desire for this episode of reaching those parents who may be teleworking, or they may be, doing this from home, you could utilize that time, make it longer, and then utilize that as your time where the house is quiet and you could get on some work calls, or you could respond to emails and kind of have that time. Another thing I always say, and that's like kind of one of my life principles, is try your best to single task. And that goes for, maybe if you have this quiet hour to do work, just do work. Don't try to throw in a load of laundry and start dinner and, answer a text, like single task. And that's also helpful throughout the day with your kids, just having them focus on one thing. And that kind of leads me to another tip, which is, I know, again, schools are mandating to some degree what you're doing, but I think it goes a long way in keeping peace if, instead of having your kids like work for completion of an assignment, I always am in favor of working for mastery of a skill and then stopping. Or working for time, saying, let's set a 20-minute timer and see how much math we can get finished. Or let's get this skill and then let's stop. Like, let's stop when everybody's feeling okay. And I feel like that takes a lot of pressure off, and it gives you a chance to come back and revisit at a later time. And I just think, as adults, we want to just check the list. We want our kids to finish this day's work or that day's assignment. Put yourself in their chair. Do you want to sit for 3 hours doing worksheets as an adult? No, your kid doesn't either. Or do you want to sit and be on a computer screen for 3 or 4 straight hours? No. So keep that in mind. And then, like I said, try to work for mastery or work for time instead of pushing through and just trying to complete things.
Because it can become endless. And that's a really good tip, that there's an end in sight, especially for little kids. I think sometimes what we think is appropriate time-wise is just not age appropriate. And that is a lack of, if we don't have the training, we just don't know. Right. As a parent, you think, no, you need to sit there until it's done. And then 2 hours later, everybody's crying. Parents, kids, everybody.
Well, and you've probably all seen and heard, like, now is not the time to like stick to your guns about things, right? And I have found that like bribery is okay sometimes. My kids are really competitive. We have these little kitchen timers, and frequently, I will say, okay, I dare you guys to see if you can finish with your math before this timer goes off. Or I use it for chores. Like I'm setting a 10-minute timer. Whoever gets back downstairs first, from getting their room tidied or the toys picked up when they were younger, they get to pick the movie for the afternoon. So like try to like lean into some of those fun parts where you're like challenging them. And I don't know, I think it's just like a human nature thing to want to try to beat the clock. And so we often do that as a way to kind of like just give ourselves a little extra boost.
I think that's a good tip, and make it fun where you can. Like you're not going to be trying to make it a 3-ring circus every day. Nobody has time for that or the energy for that. But I think having that positivity and just those little moments, you're going to be creating such good memories with your kids too. I mean, this is such a strange time, but it's also a unique time. And I was telling my daughter last night, she's 21, but she lives at home and goes to school and works and does dance and stuff. I said, you know what? You're going to be telling your kids this story one day. Well, you can't even complain. Back in my day, I had to stay in my house for however many weeks this ends up being. So you're creating memories, and this is going to be part of their growing up now, which is kind of cool in a way because you have the opportunity to shape it in a lot of ways and put some really fun memories in there. That's a really good tip. Yeah.
Well, and hopefully maybe you're kind of piecing together that a lot of what I'm sharing is favoring relationships and strong emotions and family ties over the doing and the checklist and the schoolwork. I've just said so much that like, as much as schools are doing the best, there is no standard right now. And I feel like when it all is said and done, they're going to be very flexible and show a lot of grace for like grades and deadlines and things turned in. I don't think anybody's going to like, have some huge punishment if today's math lesson wasn't completed or you were a few days late on getting the work turned in. I just think there's going to be a lot of universal grace shown for how we've all had to make do here. So
what do you think teachers are looking for, as far as from students? What do you think that they're hoping is happening for the rest of the school year?
I would just first like to say to all the teachers, like five gold stars to you.
Oh, yes.
I've just seen so many that I follow, or friends, but then also people I follow on, Instagram and Facebook, like they completely pivoted within a matter of hours and days, some of them turning their normal curriculum. And a lot of them were doing it before it was even mandated and like going above and beyond. And so kudos to all the teachers. I can't say what they're looking for, but I would think most teachers, they get into teaching because they love their students, not because they love the subjects they're teaching. Yeah. And they are looking to make sure that their kiddos are okay. They're looking to make sure that their students are flourishing mind, body, and spirit. And so, most of the time teachers are just enacting plans that are coming from above, either at the school administration level or the district level. So they're probably just trying to, jump through the hoops they've been asked to jump through for our kids. And then, hoping that as much as they can help to see your kids through this time academically and socially and emotionally and all the things. I've seen a lot of teachers doing Zoom. Back in my home state, a lot of teachers and a lot of schools are doing these like neighborhood parades where they're driving their cars through the neighborhood.
They did that here too. It's so cute.
Yeah, it's such a sweet thing. So
they are the real heroes, and they got to be missing their kids too.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was a friend or just something that was going around Facebook the other day. It was a teacher. One of his students had reached out and said they're having issues with this math lesson. And so there was a little photo the mom had taken. The teacher came to their house, set up a whiteboard outside the glass door and was explaining, doing it on the whiteboard and showing the student, and she could ask questions. And, that I was thinking, wow, that is really going above and beyond. But they've got to be missing that interaction too. They're missing their kids. They're missing all the end of school year activities, and this is hard. There's some grief involved, I think, for everybody, not just for the kids, but for the teachers and the administrators and everybody, that this is just such a strange time. So I love that message of kind of take the pressure off, and just everybody's doing the best that they can.
Right.
That's what I think. I hope. But I do want to touch real quickly on people that are maybe ramping up, and especially some of our military, they've been called up. And so you've got spouses that are not only trying to juggle either working from home or working more or losing their job, whatever situation,
Mm-hmm.
and then also handling their kids' education. And perhaps the military member is just not around. And so now they're
Right.
having to do it all themselves. And I think, like you said, taking some of the pressure off. I know a lot of people that work from home, and they're kind of relaxing on maybe some screen time so that they
Right.
have several hours in the afternoon to work, because there's no other way they're going to get it all done. And so for those people, my heart goes out to you, because that's a lot,
It is a
it
lot.
really is a lot.
Yeah, well, either one of these things on its own is a lot. To have a deployed
Right.
spouse or a spouse not available, and a coronavirus is also, hard. But then when you put both of those together, it's like, oh my goodness, yeah, like how are we gonna do this? And I remember back to my husband's deployment several years ago, and my kids were much younger at the time. And the way you get through it is one day at a time. I would say to that person, like, don't try to look too far out ahead. Don't see the continually moving horizon, right? That we don't know like how long this is going to go on, or deployments may being extended. Like, try your best not to look too far ahead. Just take today, just do today, just be in today as much as you can. I know that sounds maybe like avoidant in some ways,
No.
but I think for your own mental well-being, like, it's better to just chew small bites of your situation, like a little at a time, instead of trying to think of like, well, how am I going to do this for X number of months or weeks?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's very wise, because it's so easy to kind of project ahead and go, I just cannot keep this up, this pace. It's too much. I'm not going to be able to handle it. And I think like you said, if you just take it one day at a time. I was talking to somebody and I said, I've worked from home for a decade. And when I started working from home, I was still homeschooling all of but one were still at home. And so I was working full time, and I look back and I'm like,
Yeah.
how did I
How
do
did I
that?
do that?
Well, I would homeschool, and some days I did not start actual work until 3 or 4 p.m.
Right.
And then I would work until midnight, and then, which is insane.
Yeah.
I look back on it now, I was younger. So, and also my husband was gone a lot. So there was more flexibility in our evenings.
Yeah.
And everybody just kind of knew that's what it was. That was just the way it was.
Yeah.
And I would not recommend that schedule, but sometimes you just do what you have to do, right? Like, and it's temporary. And then you need to take some days off, and you take your weekends to really kind of recharge, even though maybe you don't remember what day it is. But, don't try to be doing stuff every single day, even with having to be at home.
I would also say, like, maybe on a more practical level, to that service member spouse who is at home, if you haven't already done so already, I would say definitely try to identify someone that is geographically nearby for you, that in the event that you did need some help, or you did need somebody to say like, hey, I just need to go drive around in my car by myself for 30 minutes. Locate somebody that isn't just a digital friend or, a parent or a friend from like way far away. And I think that'll give you just a sense of security, knowing that you do have an extra set of hands to help should the need arise. Mm-hmm. I also think it's something that, like we've mentioned several times, like, totally let go of expectations. Don't put the pressure on yourself. But then I also think it's a good idea to find something, and I shared a little bit of this on a personal Instagram thing a few weeks ago, but find a tangible item in your home or in your space that is kind of a reminder to you, or a memento to you, of something that you did that was really hard. For example, I found a 6 or 7 year old finisher medal from a half marathon I walked, and I have had it sitting out on my nightstand, because every time I start to feel like I can't do this, I don't know how long I don't know how much longer we can keep going like this, or that is a tangible reminder to me that I can do hard things. And so on that little thing I shared, I just said, like, find a photo. Maybe it's like a photo from like your delivery of your baby, or another deployment you survived, or something that you'd finished, something that you were like really proud of yourself for, and try to keep that as the focus, that when you're feeling like overwhelmed, no, I've got this. I can do hard things. I'm capable. Like, we will get through it. This will have an end. I will finish this. And
so
let that be
good.
a kind of like a personal little like boost when you're having a hard time.
That's a good idea. That is a really good idea. You've done hard things. You can do this, right?
Absolutely.
Well, and just before we close out, I did want to give you an opportunity to, if you have any ideas for bored kids and filling up time, what would you recommend? Because I know I was listening to you and Kelly's podcast where you were kind of talking about this briefly. You were saying something about, this is the time to now do art kits and do more PE, and because you won't have that time like this again.
Right.
And so kind of making the most of it. So if you want to give some tips about that.
Right. Well, I want to kind of answer that in two ways. Number one, bored kids can be kids go figure out what you want to do. And I know that that's a luxury of parents with like older kids. Like if you're got a 18-month-old and a 4-year-old, you can't just say, go entertain yourselves. I know that doesn't really apply. But for kids who are of age that can entertain themselves, maybe designate a shelf of activities that aren't always available, but maybe during that quiet time, you allow them to explore.
Yeah.
I think within reason, within the boundaries of your yard, let them go like explore bugs, or give them a little like make a little like science kit that they can take outside. I remember when mine were younger, we had a little box and it had magnifying glasses, tweezers, some little bug kits from the dollar store. We had paper that like if you sat something on it and it sat in the sun, it would like take on that imprint.
Yeah.
Things like that. So that's like kids hands on. Maybe find them some kid podcasts. I know several like public radio things do some kid podcasts, science related podcasts.
There's lots of people reading aloud books right now too on Facebook. Lots of celebrities and things like that. Yeah,
absolutely. And honestly, like I know sometimes some of us, our personality wants to control a mess, but sometimes a mess is the very best thing for a kid. We used to get bottles of shaving cream and I would let them like go to town on a reusable tablecloth I would put in my driveway and just get shaving cream all over them. And then we would like rinse off with the hose and come back inside. Or I would let them wash my car. Like I didn't care if it got clean. They were having a blast with the hose. They were getting wet, or wash their bicycles. Like there's a lot of little things that like you may feel like, oh, but that's just another mess to clean up. Don't think of it that way. Think of it as like they're having the time of their life and you might be getting a little break. So that's the kids figuring out their own boredom. But a lot of things we do as a family to kind of help fill time. We have done for a couple of summers a board game challenge where we get out all of our board games and kind of identify ones that we'd like to play as a family, spread it out over so many days. And I, again, going back to bribes, have incentivized my kids with money. Like whoever wins the most out of these 25 board games gets $50 or, some kind of reward like that. We have also put several movies and shows we want to watch on the queues of our Amazon and Netflix accounts. And so I think there's something to be said for like the anticipation piece of this. And so we try to have things that we know we'll never get through. Like we'll never get through all of our board games. We'll never get through all those movies, but just knowing that they're there. Same with books, knowing that they're there. In the minute that we're saying like, I don't have anything to do. Well, no, we've got board games, we've got movies, we've got books, and just even have everybody make a list of things they would like to get done. Maybe some of that's like cleaning or organizing or friends to write letters to. Like, I think there's just so much we can use this time to do, and we don't have to be bored unless we want to be bored.
Yeah. And I think giving kids ownership, having them make a list of things they wish they could do, I think that's such a good idea. And you might be surprised what your kids come up with, because it could be something super simple, like just taking a walk with you alone or something like that.
Yeah.
You might be surprised. So this could actually just be a really great time of like freedom for families, because suddenly, all the practices are canceled. You're not running around every night. You're trying to get other things done, but those outside expectations are sort of gone for a while. And what is your family life going to look like? And I also wonder, what is it going to look like when we all come back? Like when everything is back to normal, I have wondered a lot, will this change how people live? Will this change,
Mm-hmm.
what families choose to spend their time on? And if that makes you think about those things, that's actually a silver lining to all of this, just to being more
Absolutely.
intentional, I think. So I think you have amazing advice. And like I said, you have 2 downloads if you want to talk about real quick. One is called So You Think You Want to Homeschool.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that's a free download.
That's a free download. That's something that I put together. I was telling you before we recorded. Over the 8 years that we've spent homeschooling, I have gotten hundreds of probably just very innocent questions from friends like, hey, my daughter isn't really loving school this year. Hey, we've had trouble with it. I think I want to homeschool. Can you tell me like what I need to do to start that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a huge question that really can't be answered in a quick 15-minute phone call or a quick email response or Facebook Messenger response. So I kind of took all the things that I was saying when I hate to use the word mentor or coach, but that's what I've done over the years is help to kind of bring others to the dark side. And I just ended up putting it all in a resource. And it's really, if I do say so myself, it's really like efficient at helping you decide. It's written for the people who may be making this a permanent choice, but I shared it for free because it's got some really great exercises to work through, even if you're finding yourself doing this temporarily. Mm-hmm. Things like figuring out routines and rhythms, things like putting into those rhythms and routines, things that are life-giving to you as the parent. And then the ending part of it is for those who maybe your school isn't providing a ton or you're wanting to supplement. It gives you a quick way to work through like your kids' interests and kind of like your family style of how you might figure out what type of curriculum or resources you would like to add into your arsenal. So that's that
great.
Yeah.
And then the other one is called 10 Tips for Peaceful Temporary Homeschooling. Very, very timely.
Right. And that's actually not a resource. It's just a blog post I wrote on my personal blog.
Oh, okay.
And in some of it's what we have discussed here, but maybe just in a more succinct, like written format. And I've got some fun memes I share in that post. So yeah, it's meant to be an encouragement. It's not meant to be like do this or else, or, it's meant to be kind of at a girl, at a guy, like go for it. You've got this.
I think those are going to be such great resources for our community. And it just depends on the age of your kids, what's going to work as far as being flexible and kind of giving them some ownership and filling their time and letting them be bored. I think all of those things are great tips. I will tell you this. My oldest son, I think he was in about 7th grade, and we were reaching the end of the school year. And he said something about being bored. And I said, well, what do you want to study? Like, I was kind of tired of the griping, And I said, what is it you want to study? He goes, baseball. And of course, everything was baseball. And I said, okay, we're going to take a week, and everything you do, math, English, history, everything is going to be about baseball. And his face just lit up.
Yep.
And he went, wait, are you kidding? And I said, no, I want you to, so he ended up putting together this whole little project. And like he did, we put aside all his books for a week because we had the freedom to do that. And if you have the freedom to do something like that, take the opportunity. And he did like baseball stats and batting averages and all these rankings. And then
but that's such real world learning. And I guarantee you it has made an imprint on him, like even all these years later.
That's right. He put together this flip book of his favorite thing, and then he delved really far into the story of Jackie Robinson and civil rights. So like we ended up tying in all these things.
That's awesome.
And he does, we still talk about that. And so we did sort of start doing that more often. But, learning doesn't have to be just sitting in front of a screen, sitting in front of a book. Your kids are always learning. And it's not to cop out and be like, okay, well, they're measuring, a half a cup of flour for a cookie recipe, and we're going to call that math. Right. But it is real world.
And it's exercising creativity too, which I think maybe is a good time to really lean into that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I'd love to leave one last encouraging tip if possible.
Absolutely. Yes.
I know when you interviewed me last time and we were talking about community and kind of like how to get stuck or get unstuck from feeling kind of blah about maybe not settling in. I gave the same advice in that scenario, but I think it applies now too. When we are feeling really overwhelmed with everything that we've got going on through this quarantining, temporary schooling at home, all that, What is one thing you could do for somebody else? Can
Mm.
you use this time to do something neighborly? Could you write chalk messages on the sidewalks of your neighbors as words of encouragement? Could you donate as a family to a relief organization? For us, anytime we're starting to really like focus so much on woe is me, the quickest way to get out of that is to look for like a kind act or an act of generosity or just pure kindness, like towards someone else. And it always helps reshift our mindset. So that's my last tip.
I think that's great because it does. It takes the focus off ourselves and what we've got going on and shifts it for sure. Well, did you have any closing thoughts for teachers or parents or students?
Hang in there. You've got this. This too shall pass. all the cliches, right? No, I think we all have to just take a collective deep breath and realize that we're doing the best that we can with what we've got. None of us have ever lived through anything like this before. And so to expect perfection out of yourself or perfection out of your family or, your coworkers or whomever you're interacting with is just unfair. But most of all, expecting it out of yourself it's just not going to lead to a healthy outcome. So be kind to yourself and remember that, we'll get through it and it won't be like this forever.
We hope. Yes, there is an end in sight for sure. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on to share with our listeners your great advice and tips. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you guys make sure and go to the show notes and look for those 2 links, the So You Think You Want to Homeschool download, and then the 10 tips for peaceful temporary homeschooling. I love that. Homeschool coordinator, temporary homeschooling, and very wise advice from Claire. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys all have a great week. Bye.
Connect with Jen at jenmcdonald.net or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also purchase her book, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Love the show? Don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. Until next time, have a great week.